Very quickly, Sally Bedell Smith, is Queen Elizabeth II a Republican or a Democrat?
Oh, we'll never know. She is scrupulous about asserting her neutrality or maintaining her neutrality. It's a great guessing game. I suppose the more apt question would be whether she's a Labor or a Tory, but she has made it her business in the course of her 60-year reign to get along with every single one of her 12 prime ministers. It's an amazing span from Winston Churchill, who actually was born in the 19th century and served in her great-great-grandmother Queen Victoria's army, to David Cameron, who was born 3 years after the birth of her youngest child, Prince Edward. But she has opinions which she expresses in private, but she is extremely careful about not making political statements in public. I did catch her. I was told about one that was actually quite amusing, which was Robert Tuttle, who was one of the American ambassadors to Britain during George W. Bush, came for his presentation of his credentials, and at that moment there was a big furor about something called the Congestion Tax, which was it was a political hot potato, and it was being imposed on people to prevent them from driving into London too much. And the American embassy maintained that they were not liable to pay it because they called it the congestion charge, but they said it was a tax, and the Americans were not supposed to pay it. And so Robert Tuttle arrived for his presentation of his credentials, and they went through all the formalities, and then they have a little informal discussion. And she said to him, "I understand you think the congestion charge is a tax." He said, "Yes, ma'am, it is a tax." And she said, "Well, of course it's a tax." And of course, the head of protocol for the diplomatic corps was turning, white at the prospect that she would say something so political. But those kinds of slips are very unusual. And as far as her relationships with American presidents, she has bonded with them kind of on a personal basis, but not so much. It doesn't have anything to do with politics, Republican or Democrat.
In several instances in your book, you indicate that she has a pretty wicked sense of humor.
She does. She spends a lot of time in Scotland, and she's a great mimic. And it is said that she did a pretty wicked Gordon Brown. But her sense of humor is subtle and dry, and one of my favorite examples of it occurred about back in 2003. She has an American lady in waiting, and she was celebrating her 70th birthday, and it was being held at the famous nightclub on Berkeley Square called Annabelle's. The Queen was very excited to go to this because she had not been to a nightclub since the late 1940s, right after she got married to Prince Philip. She had a wonderful time that night, and she was seated next to Lord Salisbury, who is one of the most illustrious British aristocrats, former head of the House of Lords. And the next day, she went on an engagement to St. Albans Abbey, north of London, and she was being introduced to a whole line of dignitaries by the dean of the abbey, who spotted Lord Salisbury, in the line, and he said to the Queen, "Oh, do you know Lord Salisbury?" And she said, "Oh, yes, Robert and I were out in a nightclub last night till 1:30." So that's the sort of tenor of her dry humor.
Sally Bedell Smith is a guest. Queen Elizabeth II is the topic, and we're going to begin with a call from Mike in Syracuse, New York. Mike, you're on BookTV on C-SPAN 2.
Thank you. Sally, my question is basically this. Given the span of Queen Elizabeth's reign, it being one of the longest reigns in England or the UK's history, given all the prime ministers she's worked with, given all the historical events she's seen in her lifetime, how has that impacted her as a queen from your knowledge?
Well, I think she she has a vast store of information. Obviously, one of the fascinating things about the Queen is she does not have an ideological filter. She takes things in, and that's one reason why she is so valuable to the people who come to her for confidential audiences. Obviously, her prime ministers who meet with her most weeks for an hour at Buckingham Palace, but many other people. And she has a wisdom as well as a body of knowledge that she has, and she has an extraordinary memory for things. And when public officials come to her with questions or asking for her guidance, they always remark, even if they're skeptical going into their first encounters with her in those private audiences. And by the way, there's nobody else in the room to record anything of what anybody says, which gives them a great deal of freedom to say what's on their minds. Harold Wilson, who was Labor Prime Minister in the 1970s, and it's hard to say, but I think she had a very affectionate relationship with him. And he said his private secretary said to me that he considered her to be a very astute raconteur of the political scene. She is very good at sizing people up, at understanding the nuances of political situations. So all these things have given her a very valuable role. She's not a figurehead. She has a whole range of duties that people don't fully appreciate, and which I try to explain in the book.
We have a question from right here in the audience. Yes, ma'am.
A lot. I wanted to know if you think that the Queen misses the fact that she cannot go out, even in London, and just explore the streets. I know I read in your book that she went out with her sister at the end of World War II, and that seems like one of the only times in her life she was ever totally free to explore.
I think that's true. It's just something that was imposed upon her from an early age. When she was a young girl, her governess did take her out, and she went on the underground, and she rode on buses, and she went to some museums. But at that point, she obviously wasn't queen, so she had a little more freedom to do those kinds of things. It's just something that is part of the structure of her life. And she has a certain measure of freedom when she's on her private estates, particularly up in Scotland at Balmoral, which is a vast estate, tens of thousands of acres. And it's probably where she's happiest, because she can go out up into the hills. She can ride her horses, which, by the way, at age 86, she still does. She rides her fell ponies on the hills up at Balmoral and at Sandringham in Norfolk. So she does have that opportunity to have a sense of freedom on her own property. But Prince Philip has always had a lot more latitude in terms of getting out and about. For many years, he used to drive around London in his own London taxi cab, and he would wear a little chauffeur's cap when he sat at the wheel, and his protection officer would sit in the back seat. And he would love driving around London and being undetected. The Queen gets out probably more than you would imagine to have dinner at her friends' homes. She will go and she will have dinner in somebody's kitchen. She goes to, sometimes they have very modest, some of the older ones who've don't have as much money as they used to have very modest little apartments, and she goes there, and she does it with just one protection officer, and that probably gives her some measure of feeling free as well.
Christine in Lawrence, Kansas, you are on with Sally Bedell Smith on BookTV.
Yes, Miss Smith. I enjoyed reading your book on Princess Diana, which you wrote shortly after she passed away. And I was wondering, in your research on your new book on the Queen, if you discovered anything more about her relationship with Diana and how you would describe the Queen's relationship with Princess Diana. Thank you.